Okay. Is it working? Okay, I think we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today is Wednesday. It is June the 25th. We were supposed to be arriving in Israel today, but God willing, that'll take place a little bit later in the summer. Maybe at some point in July, we'll be able to get over there and see our family, see my folks. But God willing, all right, everything should continue moving in the right direction, and everyone should be in peace and safety. All right. So I want to share with you today is, as I said, Wednesday. We're getting ready for Shabbos Parshas Korach. I want to share with you some sources for this week's Parsha. And here's something that just jumped out at me this week as I was looking over the Parsha. And I don't know why it never really caught my attention. It must have. I don't know. I don't remember spending time looking into this. And I want to share with you where my research has taken me. So here we go. Parshas Korach, we remember how it begins. There's this rebellious uprising, and it all starts with Moshe's first cousin, Korach. That means the kid that he sat at all the bar mitzvah table at bar mitzvah, at the family tables with it. And whatever it is, sometimes we know that family machlokes could be the ugliest, and this is an example of that. So cousin Korach starts up with Moshe. He begins to doubt that Moshe has appointed everybody to positions of honor based on God's directive, and he's accusing Moshe of severe nepotism and of passing him up, and he would like a position of leadership, and he gets Shevet Ruvain very caught up in this. And the Psukim play this out. The Psukim says that at the beginning of the Parsha, that he specifically starts up, and he's got Dasan and Aviram, and he's got other people from Shevet Ruvain with him, On Ben Pelas. He's got some big names who are caught up in this. And the commentaries all explain, and we'll see a Rashi that speaks this out a little bit soon, is that some of this is based on this idea of Oila Rasha, Oila Shcheno. Shevet Ruvain was camped out right next door to the part of Shevet Levi where Korach came from, and they're neighbors. And we all know that we're influenced by our friends, we're influenced by our neighbors, and a massive swath of Shevet Ruvain got caught up in this machlokas, and that's where Dasan and Aviram, they're part of Shevet Ruvain as well. So the pasuk starts, Moshe tries to be a peacemaker. Vayishlach Moshe leKorach likro leDasan laViram. He sends messengers to call out to Dasan and Aviram b'nei Eliyav, who are the sons of Eliyav. Vayomru, and they respond back, Lo nala, we're not interested. We don't want to have a powwow with Moshe. We don't want to meet with him at all. And here they continue their chutzpah. Yud Gimel, Hama'at, is it not enough? Ki alisonu me'eretz zavas chalav udvash. They took us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. What land are they referring to? Egypt. So how chutzpah is that? That's the title that's always been given to which land? Israel, where they're going to be going. And they say, you've taken us out of a land that was flowing with milk and honey. Lamisenu ba'midbar, to have us die in this barren wilderness. Kisistarer aleinu gamistarer. And now you also want to exercise all sorts of authority over us. Get out of here. Send your agents back home. We're not going to talk to you. Now look at this next pasuk. He says, Af lo el eretz zavas chalav v'vash havisanu. Again, they repeat this. You have not taken us to a land flowing with milk and honey, meaning Israel. Vatita lanu nachlasad v'cherem. You have not given us any types of inheritances of fields or vineyards. And then it says, shockingly, these words just jumped out at me this year. Ha'eineha nashim ahem tenaker lo naleh. Even if you were to gouge out the eyes of those men, meaning referring to themselves, we still wouldn't go up. Where did they get this from? This idea about gouging out eyes? I mean, it's brutal. Where did Moshe even indicate that was on the recipe on the menu? All Moshe said, he says he's trying to make peace. Vaishlach Moshe lekrola dasan alav yiram b'nei Eliyav. He sent messenger. Can you please tell him I want to meet with them? Let's talk this out. Let's see if we can work out what the issue is here. And they respond in all sorts of chutzpah. No, we're not interested. Okay, you kind of could get that. But then, even if you were to threaten to gouge our eyeballs out, we're still not going. Where did that come from? Was there ever a threat on the table of gouging out eyeballs? Where is this coming from? So this year it hit me, and again, I don't know, it must have bothered me in the past, but this year it hit me, and I decided I want to look into this a little bit further. So let's first start with Rashi. Let's see how Rashi learns this. So we're going to see a couple Rashis on these psukim. What's going on, all these three Rashis, I should say, are on Pasuk Yud Dalet, on Pasuk 14. So let's see these three Rashis. So it says, Vatitan Lanu, he says, you didn't bring us to a land of flowing with milk and honey. You took us out of a land of milk and honey, which was Egypt, and you haven't brought us to a land of milk and honey. Vatitan Lanu Nachlas Sadav Akarim, you haven't given us any fields, no vineyards. So Rashi says here, Hadavar Musav Alo Hamor Lamala. This is all going back on the word not up above, klomer, as if to say, Lo avisanu, you have not brought us to a land of milk and honey. Vilona satalanu nachlas sadav akarim, you haven't brought us to any fields or vineyards. Amartalanu, you're the guy who told us, that I'm going to take you out of the oppression of Egypt, al eretz tova, to a good land. Mishama tzisanu. Okay, good. You took us out of there. You didn't bring us to any land flowing with milk and honey. We're here in this wilderness. We're a week after, we're reading this a week, but this immediately follows the incident of the Meraglim, and we just had a decree put on us to die in this wilderness. You told us after incident of spies, we're all going to die here. So we're fed up with you. We're furious. You took us out of our comfortable place. You promised us big. You delivered us nothing. And now you told us we're all going to die in this barren wilderness. Next one. Even if you were to gouge out our eyes. Now, he didn't say our eyes. He said the eyes of those men. So he says that's a euphemism. Even if you were to threaten to gouge out our eyes if we don't speak with you, we're still not going to go. Now, what's with that expression, those men? It's almost like a mazel thing. They don't want to say, they don't want to verbalize that you're going to gouge out our eyes because it's like, al tiftach pelasat. I don't want to. They're nervous about about any kind of mazel issues, so they kind of put it on the third party. They say even if you were going to threaten to gouge out those people's eyes, we're still not going up. So again, so you see, they're nervous about their own eyes. Where did this come from? Why do they have this fear that there's any kind of threat out there that Moshe is going to gouge their eyeballs out? Where'd this come from? So let's see. We're going to start with some commentaries, and you're going to see that we're going to start with the Chazkuni, which is on the bottom, and then we're going to go to the Seforno, and you're going to see that they're basically taking the same approach here. Let's see what they say. Chazkuni's on the bottom. So that's one of our Rishonim. He says, hey, even if you're going to try to gouge out our eyes. So he says, bit miyah. He's astonished. In other words, they're saying that it's a metaphor. They're saying to Moshe and Shak, do you really think it's basically you think you're pulling the wool over our eyes? That's what they're saying here. Do you really think do you really think you can blind us? In other words, Moshe never was threatening them that he was going to gouge out their eyeballs. They're basically saying, did you really think you could hoodwink us and just get us to roll over? You took us out of a land of comfort. You promised us big. Now we're in the wilderness, and you said we're all going to die here. You think we're just going to take this laying down? You think we're blind? That's what they're basically saying.
Such short memories.
You see what you want to see. What am I going to say? It's my fault?
Something years of servitude.
Okay, but now we're going to die in the wilderness. You just said we're going to die in the wilderness. You told us we're not going in anymore. You, the guy who took us out, and now you say we're going to die here in this wilderness. You could say, okay, we kind of had something to do with that in terms of complaining about the land of Israel. They don't mention that at all. But Moshe did say they're going to die in the wilderness. So what's this expression? You're going to gouge out our eyes. So basically, that's a euphemism. They're saying, what, you think we're not going to notice? You think you're going to pull the wool off our eyes? You think we're blind? You think we don't have eyes to see? And to see this incredible trap you put us into? Shema Eretz Mitzrayim Shitova Elisanu. You took us out of a good land of Egypt. Okay, we were oppressed, but at least they had grocery stores. You had a 7-Eleven on the corner. Vilo Shilamta Lanu and you have not paid us back all the promises you made. To bring us a land flowing milk and honey. But on the contrary, what did you just tell us after the synod of spies? In this wilderness you will fall, and there you will be buried. And furthermore, He says, you basically you dropped the bomb on us. You came down with us with the midas hadin, with the strict attribute of justice. L'kach lo na'aleh elecha, and that's why we're not going up to you. She'einanu ma'aminin oscha bishum havchana alzos. We don't trust you at all anymore. That's it. You're as far as we're concerned, you're puzzled. We don't have any trust in you whatsoever. So the way the Chizkuni is saying this, they never were worried Moshe was threatening to gouge their eyeballs out. It was a euphemism of saying, basically, what do you think we're blind? We don't realize the massive injustice that you've done here. That's what they were saying. So it's a matter of speaking. That's how the Chizkuni wants to deal with it. Let's see the Sefarno. The Sefarno is going to take a similar route. Again, another Rishon. The Sefarno says, Af lo al eretz zavas v'chash, and he says, Vatitamanu, you've given us Lo dai sherosalanu. It's not enough that you wronged us. Lo tzionu me'eretz zavas cholav v'dvash. Ela midbar, to take us out of a land of plenty and bring us into a barren wilderness. But now you continue to toy with us. You're continuing to mess around with us. El Eretz Shamarta Klal. You're not bringing us to that land that you spoke about. You're not taking us there at all. Ki ilu nasato lanu nachlas. And you made it out like we had all these big expectations. We were going to get fields. We were going to get vineyards. You messed with us. You started to tell us all these halachas that were agricultural laws that were going to apply in the land of Israel. That's torture. Because now we're going to be here in the wilderness. Kilu kvar haisalanu. You're telling us all these dinim as if we already have this, but we don't. We're in this barren wilderness. Value lanu stekerim. You're speaking to us as if we already have this stuff. Hainei anashim haim tanakir. Hatachshov lenakir einenu bofen shelo nakir tachlosecha. Do you really think that you can gouge out our eyes in such a manner that we can't recognize your tricks? In other words, it's a euphemism, the way the Sefarno is learning. It's very similar to the Chizkuni. They're being very chutzpahdik, but they're saying to Moshe, like, what do you take us for? You think we're blind? You think we were born yesterday? I'm a street kid. I'm not falling for your trick. That's basically what they're saying. That's how the Chizkuni and the Sefarno understand this expression. They never anticipated that Moshe was threatening to gouge out their eyeballs. This was a manner of speaking. Let's see one more Rishon. He's going to start off this way, and then he's going to open our eyes to a completely different way to view this. So this next source, we've quoted it once or twice. It's called Paneach Raza. So again, that's a very uncommon name. It's one of the Balei Tosos. He was one of the authors of the Tosos. And here's something fascinating. This past Shabbos, I was talking to Rabbi Zions, and he mentioned to me the following story. He said that he had a grandfather who was a European Talmud Chacham, who was a rabbi who came, made it through with the Mir Yeshiva through Shanghai and all that, and came to America after the Holocaust and lived in the Bronx as a rabbi for many years. His name was Rabbi Abba Zions. So he said he was once at some type of a shiur in New York while he was still living in New York, and Rav Hershel Schachter of Yeshiva University in the OU, Rav Hershel Schachter was giving a shiur, some kind of halacha shiur. And he says afterwards he went over to talk over a couple of points about it with Rabbi Schachter, and Rabbi Schachter says to him, Shalom Aleichem, what's your name? So he told him, my name's Naftali Zions. So right away he says, are you related to Rabbi Abba Zions? He says, yeah, that was my grandfather. He says, he worked on putting out the Paneach Raza. And Rabbi Zions was shocked. Like, how do you know that? Like, first of all, how'd you even connect? Is it that uncommon of a name that I say Zions, you immediately jump and say, oh, you're related to Rabbi Abba Zions? Oh, and you know about the Paneach Raza. It must be like he was holding in the sefer. Like, again, I don't know if he was just learning it or if he's just got that encyclopedic memory and this instant flashback that it just connected it. But anyhow, so when Rabbi Zions told me this on Shabbos, and all of a sudden I see this Paneach Raza being quoted, I looked it up. And sure enough, the version I saw online is the version that Rabbi Zions' grandfather put together. It says on the bottom here, V'atan nidfas mechadash b'seder chadash. It's now been reprinted in a new order, v'osios mirusinam, with a good clear print. V'nosaf lakach muvo miyuchad al sefer, and there's a good introduction that's been written. Umechabro, and who put this together? Harav Agon Rav Abba Zions Zatzal. In other words, this was all based on the work of Rabbi Abba Zions, and this came out somewhat recently, this nice new version. This is Shnas Tafshin Nun Ches. That would have been, if I'm correct, that would have been 1998. when this came out. So Rabbi Zain's grandfather had already passed by then, but it was probably based on his work, whether it was maybe he put out an earlier version and was reprinted, or maybe this was finally printing it based on all of his all of his notes and everything like that. And at the beginning of this volume, there's a one-page a brief bio on Rabbi Zion's grandfather. I brought this into show the other night for Mincha. I said, it's amazing. We were just talking about this on Shabbos, and look at this mazel. I'm looking something up for the Wednesday Parsha here. I see it quoted, so I look for it online, and there it is. There's your grandfather right there. So here it is, a one-page biographical blurb. Kiyum L'Dmuso Shel Rav Agon of Abba Zion Zatzal. This is a glimpse into the life and who he was, Rav Zion, and he was the one who put this all together. And there's one, two, three, four, five, a 6 paragraph bio, basically talking about his childhood in Europe. He was born in the city of Brisk, where he had his yeshiva education. I believe it was in Kamenetz by Rabbi Ber Leibowitz, and then how he escaped with the Mir Yeshiva to Shanghai, and then afterwards came to America, was a rabbi in the Bronx for many years, and spent a lot of time on this sefer specifically, bringing it from manuscript to a publishable form and making corrections and whatnot. So I just thought that was fascinating, just to see how God works in such amazing ways. Anyhow, so let's see what the Paneach Raza says with that introduction. He's also bothered by how do we understand this, what Dasan and Aviram said, that even if you were to gouge our eyeballs out, we're still not going to talk to you. So let's see what he says. Klomar, it's as if to say, af or af od, af iver b'tzarayim, even someone who was an iver b'tzarayim, meaning someone who was blind b'tzarayim, if he's in the afternoon, meaning the lights out, yimashesh, he can still feel around to make his way around. But in other words, even if he doesn't have someone who's blind doesn't have eyesight, he can still feel his way around to get around. V'yavin she'en b'cha v'tzuvecha mamish l'chein lo nala. Meaning, even if someone was completely blind, all they need to do is just feel, and they could pick up on the scam that you're pulling off. In other words, it's another way of saying, like, what do you think? We're not street smart. We're onto you, Moshe. We know your scam. Davar acher, another way to understand this. Are you trying to hoodwink us? Are you trying to basically pull a fast one on us? Do you really think we're not capable of recognizing your trickery and everything that you're trying to do? So it's very similar. Now here's his third one, which is completely a different direction. Davar acher. Third way to understand this. Af im tinaker ene haknanim. Even if you told us that you've got this massive battle plan when we show up in Canaan, we're not going to go because we're adults, but our kids are going to go, and we're nervous for them. And you're going to tell us, even if when we get there, you got to, you know how you're going to win? You've got some master stroke, how you're going to blind the Canaanim, and now our armies will be successful. Still, even if you were able to pull that off, lo nuchal la'alos aleim, we still could never be victorious against the Canaanim, even if they were blinded. Legodel verov chazakam ukrosam, because of their numbers and just how strong they are. So this third shot is very different. When it's saying it's of the eyes of those men, it's not a euphemism. Rashi said if they're talking about themselves, why do you say the eyes of those men? Because it's like mazel. We don't want to talk about ourselves. That even if you were to gouge our eyes out, we're talking about those men. Now he's saying, no, those men means those men. They're not talking about themselves. They're talking about the Canaanim. They're talking about the natives. They say, we are so scared based on what the Meraglim's report was. Even if you had some way that you could gouge out the eyes, you could blind all the inhabitants of Canaan, we still don't believe we could beat them. And even we're not going to lose because we're going to die in the midbar, but our kids, you want to say, are going in. Look what you did. You're going to kill our whole families and everyone because we still won't be able to win. Ha'enei ha'nashim ha'hem is not talking about themselves. This is the first time we're seeing it now. It's going on the Canaanim. It's going on the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. That's what they're saying. Now it makes a lot of sense. It's following the Meraglim. They never thought Moshe was threatening to gouge their eyes out. They're basically saying to him, even if you had some plan how you could blind the natives, we still can't win. Now the question comes up, where did the Paneach Raza get this from? That's a very creative way to look at this. And what's Moshe's plan to blind the eyes of the Canaanim? Let's see the next source. So then I saw someone quote this Targum Yonasan. The Targum Yonasan, this is one of the Aramaic translations of the Chumash. We're used to Onkelos. Well, there's another translation out there called Targum Yonasan. Look how he translates Pasuk Yadalad. He translates Pasuk Yudal. Again, Pasuk Yudal in the Hebrew was Afel eretz zavas chalav udvash avisanu. Have you taken us to a land flowing milk and honey? Vatitan lanu nachlas sadav acherem. Have you given us fields and all sorts of vineyards? Heinei anashim ahim tenaker. Even if you were to gouge out the eyes, lo nala, we're still not going up. So look how he translates this. So does Aramaic. Baram la la'ara avda chalav udvash alatana. Neither have you brought us into a land producing milk and honey. V'yahavta lanu achsanas chalkin v'karmen, and you still haven't given us any inheritance of fields or vineyards. Ha'einahon deguvraya ha'inun deba'arahi. Even if you were to blind the eyes of the men of that land, tis navar, even if you could make them blind, utenatseach, do you think we could possibly be victorious over them? Yason lo nesok l'taman. We shall not go up there. So this Targum Yonasan is saying like that last shot of the Paneach Raza. He's saying this Targum Yonasan is even if you could blind the eyes of those men in the land of Canaan, we still can't win. So we're not going. Yes, Joanne.
So in English, it's those men.
Yeah.
What in Hebrew, what is it? Because that
In Hebrew, it's those men.
exactly.
Yeah, Rashi, though, told us that it makes no sense to say those men are talking about themselves. So he said it's a mazel thing. They don't want to talk about themselves, talking about their own eyes getting gouged out. This keeps it in the plain reading of the Chumash now. And that's what I like. In other words, you had the Chizkuni saying it was a metaphor. You had the Seforno saying it's a metaphor. The first two pshatim in the Paneach Raza was saying it's a metaphor. Now that last pshat in the Paneach Raza in this Targum Yonos, I'm saying it's not a metaphor, and the pasuk is literal. It's not talking about them. It's talking about the inhabitants of Canaan, the people that we are so scared to go to battle against, based on the reports of the Meraglim. Even if you came up with a plan that you think you're going to even the playing field by blinding them, so now we could attack, we still can't win. That's how strong those guys are. Very cool. Let's just see one more source. This is the one that I saw that tipped me off to some of this. So the Ksava Kabbalah, this is Rav Mecklenburg, so he's writing this in the 1800s. He says, Ha'ene Anashim, bottom of page 2, Ha'ene Anashim Tenaker. So here he quotes Targum Yonasan. He says, Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. How did the Targum Yonasan translate it? There it is in the Aramaic. So he says, Hasev, he goes, Hanashim Ahem. So what is he doing? He's saying, yeah, when the Torah, like Joanne said, when the Torah said Hanashim Ahem, those men, it's not like a euphemism for us. Those men means those men. And it's talking about Al Yoshvei Haaretz, the inhabitants of the land, meaning Canaan, Medubar Mimenu. That's who we're talking about. Vitamo, Gam im Yala Biyadcha. What he's basically saying is, even if you were strong enough, at least Gabriel Yosheretz Canaan and carry name, you could come up with some kind of technique that you could gouge out their eyes, you could blind them. We still wouldn't be able to win against them. There are other things that are going to prevent us from being victorious. Even if you think you can level the playing field by blinding them, it's not going to work. They're that powerful. So now we've got, I would say, a whole different reading of this pasuk that I think is a lot smoother than the Chizkuni and then the Seforno. But this begs the question, still, where did they come up with this idea that Moshe had any kind of plan up his sleeves to blind the Canaanim? Right? They're saying, even if you were successful, you say your first wave of fighters are going to go in there and knock off their air defense. Your first wave of fighters are going to go in there and knock off their sight. We still can't win. Where'd they get this idea from? Bingo. Let's check out page 3. Page 3, I have a chumash in my office that has a commentary on the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, and that's what you see on the top of page 3. This has a commentary on that Aramaic translation. Let's see what he does. He's gonna, I think, deliver a home run here. So look at the top. We're in the right column. So there he quotes that's the Aramaic. So he says, what does it mean? Even if you were able to knock out the sight of the inhabitants of Canaan, you think we could win against them? We're still not going. So he says, Eino mefarish karashi v'shara mefarshim. Here the Targum Yonasan is taking a great diversion. He is not explaining the words of Dasan and Aviram like what Rashi and the Chizkuni, the Seforno, I believe the Rashbam, all of them. He's not going like them. That they were talking about themselves, saying, even if you were to blind us, we're still not going. Ella, Allah umos shahayu bi Eretz Yisrael. They're talking about the natives who were living in the land of Israel. Now, where'd they get this idea from that Moshe had any plan that he was going to blind them? In the brackets, Ayin Maseches Sota. Look in the tractate Sota, and that's where you're going to see that this is all where this plays itself out. So, what is Maseches Sota? He says Shahisat Sirah. There was some type of hornet, and we'll soon see exactly what that's referring to. Shematila eres be'enei yoshvei haaretz, that Moshe told them, God's got a massive trick up his sleeve. There's going to be some kind of flying insect, translated often as a hornet. There's going to be some kind of some flying insect that's got some venom that it's going to basically inject, and it's going to blind the locals, and that's how we're going to succeed at war against them. So Moshe had mentioned to them that he had a plan how we're going to succeed against them, and that is based on this tzira, based on which is always translated as a hornet. We don't know what it was. It was some kind of special insect that was going to basically level the playing field and make it that all those mighty warriors that the Meraglim had told Bnei Yisrael about and got them all intimidated of, this is what's going to make it possible. Moshe had told them about this. So, and we're going to soon see exactly where. So we're going to see two places in the Torah where Moshe has told them about the tzira. So now this all makes a lot of sense. This Targum Yonasan and that Panei Raza. Now we see what Dasan and Aviram are saying. This follows on the heels of the Meraglim. They're demoralized. They're dejected, and they say we can't go in. We know we can't go in because it was the gezerah. The decree was that the adult men are going to die here in the wilderness. But we're worried about our kids. You're saying our kids are going to go in based on the reports the Meraglim came back with. We don't believe they'll be able to beat them. And Moshe, you think you've got this trick up your sleeve that you're going to knock out their sight and that's going to level the playing field? Even with that, they're too strong. Where did Moshe ever say anything about blinding the inhabitants to make this all work? Let's introduce you to the Tzira. So there's two places in the Chumash where this comes up. One's in Sefer Shmos, one's in Sefer Devarim. Let's see first the one in Sefer Devarim. This is what Rashi quotes, and Rashi quotes this Gemara that this, and you'll see here it's straight out. At the end of the Chumash in Sefer Devarim, Moshe says, "V'gam es hatzira yishalach Hashem Elokecha ba." He's telling them when we eventually go into the land of Israel and we're going to fight, don't worry so much because there's going to be very little that's required of us. God's going to send in this tzira. He's going to send in these hornets or this flying creature to initially inflict an incredible amount of damage on the natives. Aravoda nisharim vanistrim panecha, and that they will fight against them until the survivors and those who hide from you perish. Meaning, everyone knows urban warfare is the worst type of warfare to have. So you got to send people into the houses. He says you won't have to worry about that. Tzira is going to go in. It's going to inflict massive damage. It's going to weaken everyone. They're going to flush them out, and then you'll be able to fight him, and he'll have the upper hand. Let's see Rashi, because here Rashi quotes that Gemara in Sota. Hatzira. What is the tzira? So he says min sheretz of. It's some type of flying insect. Shaisha zorekes baham mara. It would inject poison into the enemy. Umisarsan. It would make them impotent. I don't think that means in terms of being able to impregnate. I think it means in terms of just taking away their strength. Umisama es enem, and it also blinds them b'chol makom shayu nistarim sham, wherever they were hiding. So basically, you've got this enemy force, extremely strong, extremely intimidating. Moshe is saying, don't worry about it. They're going to be made impotent. They're going to be made into weaklings that they won't be able to defend themselves and they won't be able to see because God's got this tzira, this insect that he's going to send in to flush them out. And that's how we're going to win. Now, with this, now look how this all fits with the Panach Raza and the Targum Yonasan, is that what it's saying is that Moshe had told Klal Yisrael about this. He had told the Jews, I know how dejected, how demoralized you are based on the Meraglim's report. I'm still telling you, don't worry about it. What they said is true. There are giants living in Canaan. There are some very powerful warlords in Canaan, and they're mighty warriors. But we got this. Hashem's going to flush them out, and he's going to make them. He's going to bring them to their knees. They're not going to be anywhere near as mighty as you think they are now. He's got the tzira. The tzira are going to go in there first. That's going to be our shock troops. These insects are going to go in. They're going to inject their poison into them, and they're going to flush them out. And when they finally come out and face us in battle, they're going to be incredibly weakened, incredibly diminished, and they won't even be able to see It'll be like, what's that expression? Like shooting ducks in a pond. It's gonna be so simple that this is nothing to worry about. Moshe had told them that, and that's what Dasan and Aviram were responding to when they said, "Ha'ene hanashim ahem tinaker lo naleh." Even if you were to gouge out their eyes, meaning even if you were to blind Hanashim, those men, the inhabitants of Canaan, lo naleh. Now, not that we're not going to talk to you, Moshe. Lo naleh, we're not going to go up into Israel and to succeed. It's a mission that's doomed to failure. That's how that pasuk is reading now. Look at this. It totally gave a new pshat, a new understanding to this pasuk. Beautiful. Now I want to diverge onto something else because we just mentioned the tzira. I want to share with you something incredible I heard a couple years ago from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman in Brooklyn. Tzira. As I said to you, this flying insect is mentioned twice in the Torah. I just shared with you the one that's mentioned in Devarim. But let me share with you the other place it shows up. This is very early in our Jewish national story. This is pretty soon after Yetzias Mitzrayim. When Moshe is telling the Jewish people, the splitting of the sea has occurred. God has drowned our enemies. We're on the march towards our Sinai. And then from our Sinai, we're supposed to go right into the land of Israel. So Moshe is giving everyone a pep rally and he's telling them what to expect. So let's look at now, the next source. This is Shmos chapter 23. This is the first time the Torah Tzira is mentioned. It says, V'shalachti es hatzira. God says, I will send the tzira lefanecha before you. V'gershas achivi es haknani achitim lefanecha. And they will drive out the achivi, the knani, the chitim, everyone, all the natives who are there. The tzira is going to take care of this for you. But let's see what Rashi says here, quoting the Medrash. What is the tzira? Min sheretz oaf. It's a type of flying insect. Vaisamaka osam beineim. It seems as if it would strike them in their eyes, or it would strike them and it would really affect their eyes. Umetila bem eres. It would inject poison into them. Vehem mesim. And what did this poison do? It killed them. Did it say anything about blinding them, making them impotent? No. Here it sounds like the Tzira are a lot more powerful. Sounds like they're a deadly viper. These Tzira are these flying death machines. Are the Jewish people even going to have to pick up a sword? From this medrash that Rashi is quoting here about Tzira, they're not going to have to do a thing. It's lethal. The Tzira is lethal. But the Tzira that we saw Rashi quote in Devarim, are the Jews still going to have to pick up a sword? Yeah, it's going to make them impotent. It's going to make them much weaker. It's going to blind them, but they're still going to have to get out there and fight. What happened? What a change. This was Rabbi Reisman's question. He says, look at this. Here it is that you see it in Shemos, the first time that Chazal introduced us to the Tzira, that the Tzira are a death. They're lethal. It's a flying viper, this thing, that it's going to just totally kill the locals. The Jews won't even have to pull back their bow and arrow. It's going to knock off all their enemies. But in Devarim, it tells us it's going to soften them up. It's going to really get them ready for the beating, so we'll be able to fight and be victorious over them. What changed? Great question, right? You see that question? Until I heard Rabbi Reisman ask this, I never noticed this, that it was such different definitions of tzira that Rashi offers. So let's take a look at page 4. And Rabbi Reisman suggested, he said, there's one more Rashi that could answer this. So let's see on page 4. So he says, let's take a look at one more Rashi all the way at the beginning of Sefer Devarim. Sefer Devarim in chapter 1, that's where Moshe begins his final soliloquy to the Jewish people. And in Pasuk Ches, he says, Re'ena sati lefnechem es haaretz. God says to the Jewish people, see, I've given you the land, bo urushu, go and possess it. Es haaretz asher nishma Hashem l'avosechem, the land that he's promised your fathers, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, l'seis lam l'zar machreim, to offer it to them and their children after them. So let's see Rashi there. Rashi says, bo urushu. Ein ma'arer b'davar. He says, no one will contest the matter. V'nechem tzrichim l'milchama. And he says, you never would have even had to fight. Ilu lo sholchu meraglim. If only you had not sent the meraglim, lo hayu tzrichim l'cholizayin. You never would have even needed weapons. You see what this Rashi is saying? There's a massive difference between Shemos and Devarim. What happened in between the Exodus and between when the Jews are finally going into the land? There was a sin of the spies. What changed after the sin of the spies?
To do work.
Now we're gonna have to fight. It sounds like the initial plan A, when Hashem was taking us out of Mitzrayim, was that we were so obedient, we were behaving ourselves, we had God on our side to such an awesome degree that we would not have had to fire a weapon. We wouldn't have had to pull back our bow and arrow and fire an arrow. We wouldn't have had to charge the enemy with a sword. The Tzira would have taken care of everything. But then we had the sin of the spies. What was the sin of the spies? That's when we said, whoa, this is too frightening. This is totally miraculous. This whole thing you're telling us we're just going to walk into this land. We got to go about this in at least in some kind of fashion that makes sense. Let's spend in spies. Let's reconnoiter. Let's make sense. What's the battle strategy? At which point God says, oh, that's the game we want to play. You want to stay away from miracles? You want to live in a world of law and order? Okay, if that's the world you want to live in, you picked it, you chose it. Now we're gonna have to fight. God says, I'm still gonna send the tzira, but their job has changed. They're less lethal now. The initial plan A, was before the Chet Meraglim, this was going to be incredibly miraculous. We were going to run right into Eretz Yisrael. We were not going to have to fight. That Cyril would have taken care of everything for us. But we changed our reality. And this is something we'll see how Rabbi Reisman words it. We changed our reality in the sin of the spies when we rejected. We told God we don't want to live on that kind of elevated status where we're living in a world of miracles. We want to live more in a world of law and order where we understand and hishtadlos. God says, okay, if that's what you're choosing, that's what you got. But now that Sirah is not going to be as powerful anymore. They'll be able to make them impotent, they'll blind them, but you're going to have to fight. And that's why in Sefer Shemos, the Tzira, when we're introduced to it, is talking about these are flying death machines. These are B-2 bombers that are going to totally destroy them. But then when we get to Devarim, they're still, all they are is they even the playing field, so to say. And we're going to have to fight the locals. That's the difference between those two Tziras. Yeah.
So the sin was sending the spies, not
Well,
exactly.
both. We're going to see this both. Yeah, we're going to see how it's going to be both. In other words, what we did as a people when we sent the spies, and then when we affirmed the report, and the reason we were crying so badly was because we really believed in this world of Hishtadlus and really believed in this world that we're trying to handle this all ourselves. We're getting away from a world of miracles, getting away from a relationship of God that's completely miraculous. So I would say it was the sending and our affirmation of that report and everything of that and all the complaining that occurs after. Let's see how Rabbi Reisman words this. So this is on page 4. So this is from, again, I heard this year and then I saw someone write it up. He says, Rabbi Reisman says, I would suggest that Yavo Rashi Shlishi v'Achriya Beineim. There's a third Rashi that can answer this steer, the contradiction between these two. That Rashi is in Parshas Devarim 1:8. There Rashi says, Ilu lo sholchu meraglim lo yitzrichel l'chli it says that in conquering Eretz Yisrael, they had to conquer Eretz Yisrael by fighting a battle, by taking swords and tools of war. Ilu lo sholch meraglim. Had the meraglim not been sent, lo hayitzrichen l'chli zayin. They never would have needed to do actual battle. That Rashi answers the stira between the other two. The first Rashi in Parshas Mishpatim, before the story of the meraglim. There they would not have had to do battle in a physical sense. There the tzira would have done the job for them and would have destroyed. Here in Parshas Ekev, it's after the story of the meraglim and everything changed. Here, in fact, they had to do battle, and the tzira was only able to help them. This yisod is the yisod that it says in the Drashas Haran. That was one of our Rishonim, how he wants to say that basically we can, based on our actions, change the reality of the world around us. So here was based on the actions of Klal Yisrael, changed the reality of the power that this tzira had. The Drashas Haran has a yisod that a person creates his own reality. Had they not sent the Meraglim, then they could have done battle in a supernatural way through Shamayim. By sending the Meraglim, they said, no, we have to use strategy. We have to know how to attack. They created the reality. They schlepped themselves down to a world in which they needed more hishtadlus, more effort, and therefore they had to exist in that level. This is the story of the Tzira, and this might help explain why in Sefer Yoshua, the Tzira is not a major force. It is mentioned all the way at the end of the last parak, where Yeshua mentions the Tzira. It says there, Veshlach lefnechem es Tzira, but it's not a major force in any of the battles conquering Eretz Yisrael. In other words, it's almost a side note. It doesn't mention it. The whole Sefer Yeshua, a good chunk of it, details the battles against the locals. Nowhere do you see reports in there that the Tzira played a major role. Says why? Because in a certain sense, based on the choices and decisions that the Jewish people had made, they had sidelined the Tzira. All the way at the end, in Sefer Yoshua, it says, oh yeah, they had some assistance from this Tzira. But again, it never played this major, major role that it would have been that it was recounted throughout Sefer Yoshua there. So that's what Rabbi Reisman did. So I think this was just all very fascinating. What we have again, just to bring this back home, is that we had this initial confrontation between Dasan and Aviram and the agents that Moshe has sent to summon them. And they responded with a lot of chutzpah, but they said this very cryptic statement that even if you were to gouge out the eyes of those men, lo naleh, we will not go up. So the way Rashi and everyone else seems to learn it was that those men is a euphemism for themselves, and it's a metaphor. They're saying, "What do you think we are? Foolish? We weren't born yesterday. We saw what you did, and we're not blind, and we're not going up. We're not going up. Either means to meet you, or we're not going up to the land of Israel." That's how it's being read. And again, what that's doing is it's saying, don't take it literally, because Moshe never threatened they were going to gouge your eyes out. And then we saw that Paneach Raza, who says there's another way to read the pasuk. That's not talking about them. It's talking about the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. Even if you had some trick up your sleeve, how you were going to blind them, we still can't win. We can't do it. And that's that. And then we saw the Targum Yonason said that. And then that begs the question, okay, but where'd they get this idea from that Moshe had this trick up his sleeve that he was going to blind them? Then that introduces us to the Tzira, because there Moshe did tell him, we do have this trick. That's what we're going to do. But one second, when did the Tzira have this ability to blind? Initially in Sefer Shemos, it said they had the ability to kill. Sounds like no. After the Cheder Meraglim, this was part of the depressing message that they got. We changed our reality based on the Cheder of the Meraglim, the sin of the spies. We changed our reality, and now we're living in a world that's going to need a lot more human involvement and human effort on our part. It's not a world of pure miracles anymore. That Sira's abilities have been downgraded. All they're going to be able to do is make them weak and make them blind, and we're going to have to go out and fight. To that, that's what Dasan and Aviram are responding to. Dasan and Aviram are saying we still won't be able to win because even if you had this trick, even if the Tzira could function in that capacity, that they could blind them, we're still going to have to fight. Based on the reports of the Meraglim, those guys are so big, so bad, such warmongers. We still won't be able to beat them. Lo nala, we're not going up. We're never entering into the land of Israel. Look how that makes that pasuk now take on so much more depth and so much more meaning. I thought this was just incredibly impressive. And this fits like a glove in the timing of all this because, again, this is right after the sin of the spies. This might fit very well that maybe they were informed. By the way, based on all this, another aspect of the sin of the spies, it's not just that the adult males are going to die in the wilderness. Remember those tzira I told you about in Sefer Shemos? Oops, they just been downgraded. All they're going to do is blind them now. They're not gonna kill them. And that now all of a sudden introduces us to this pasuk. I thought this is incredible how all of a sudden there's so much more taking place in this pasuk than we may have seen before.
Somewhat Mida connected Mida because they didn't allow their eyes to see the positive. They only saw
All the negative of the land of Israel.
name.
Yeah.
The fact that it's the eye itself is probably a whole nother discussion.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's a good
the
point. Could have been some other part of the body, right? Could have been some other way to make them to even the playing field. All right. Very good.
it's a little gory.
Yeah, but I think it's fascinating and now this totally it makes this really makes this so much brings up so much. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the recording. If anyone has anything they would like to share, please feel free. I'm going to stop the recording. If anyone has anything that they'd like to share,